Okay, hello everyone, this is Peter. So let's talking about what is physics in these sections. So in the past, if people want to talking about the things and try to uh, describe something, we must use some the simples, maybe the 1, 2, 3, 4, or these kinds of the numbers. So we can know that the numbers will be really important. So the numbers comes from the physics. So actually, that's when we use the max. So the max actually is we use the symbols to stands for the max. So when we use the max, after we finish your max, and we try to connect the max to the we try to connect the max to the realities. So we will use the physics. So we will use the physics to connect the reality and the virtuality. So the physics actually is based on the max. So there's lots of the max you got to learn when if you study the if you study the physics departments in the high schools in the universities, you will be know that. However, actually in the how to we connect the maths and the physics. So the scientists or we call it physics, the physics says if you want to come strong connected to the life and you want to connect the life and the virtualities in the numbers, so you got to come imagine that there is some particles. So the physics the first proposed idea about the particles. So this particle, I think you have been learning that will be the atoms. Atoms or some subparticles. So the some particles means that like the neutron or patrons and so on. Okay, so this is the physics we're talking about. So you want to connect the maths and the physics, you will start from the atoms. And we told you that the atoms will be construct the models of the matters, and the matter will connect to each other and will become the carbons. So the physics we finally use and the physics finally we will when we finish out the fundamental theory about the physics, we will we will get into the part we call chemistry. So the chemistry is full of lots of the things like the carbon and the reagent. So some chemicals reaction and the carbons will form the chemistries. So the chemistry, when we finish out the chemistry and we know the fundamental compounds and the substance will form some things, and finally we can get the into the another section will be the biologics. So we all know that the biologics is full of the chemistry and physics. So in today's there is some department in the graduate schools have some integration about the biology of the biology and the chemistry and also the biology and the physics. And we from the fundamental of the biologics, and there is something about it. The first of all will be that there are some cells and the cells to the tissues and the tissue to the organ and organ finally into the system, and the system will become the bodies. So if you want to know the bodies, actually talking about the fundamental things will be the atoms. However, in the biology, the minus functional units is the cells, right? So actually the cells is including the lots of the compounds, reactions, and atoms in the cells. So when we're talking about what is physics, actually the physics is based on the max, and we use the max to connect to the we use the max to connect to the reality and the virtualities. Okay, so okay. So when we start to talking the physics, actually is based on when we if we want to uh, try to describe some things, and maybe the physics actually is science, and science is we need a scientific method to help us to figure out some things. So if you want to figure something, you got to start from the observations. So we use the observation to see some phenomena, and when we finish the observations, so when we finish our observation, we use maybe propose some hypotheses. Okay, so when we propose some hypotheses, maybe you will start to doing the experiment, right? So the experiments and become because the physics actually is an experimental subject. So we need the experiment. So you got to set up an experiment. That would be great. So when we finish the experiment, finally we will gather some data, and we will discussions. So discussion will be the important parts of this flows chart. Okay, so discussion we were talking about and we were talking about why the things were happening. We can study it from the data analysis, and finally we will get the result. Okay, so get a result, and we will finally get some conclusion, or maybe someone will refute it, and so if someone refutes it, we will back to the hypothesis and start our experiment, right? So this is this refute. So every mathematical, we call this is the scientific methods to thinking about the flowchart about this one. So if we want to start to observe something, and we can propose a hypothesis, and we construct, and finally the result will become the laws, or maybe just keep it. Okay, maybe someone will break it the laws and finally become to the cells. Okay, so this is the scientific method. So in these ways, the physics form the 6 fundamental mechanics to help us to know the basics of the physics language. The first of all one will be the classical mechanics. And the classical mechanic actually we just can only focus on the one things, and there was the classical mechanics. We just can focus on one things, that is the one object. So if one object will be affected, or one or two objects connect together, we can use the classical mechanic to analyze. However, actually the classical mechanic is based on the Newtonian mechanics. So actually, we cannot. We got to use the concept of force and the concept of the something about the Newton's laws. Okay, so however, if you want to talking about the many bodies systems, So the many body system actually is totally about the statistical. So the statistical can converse among the many bodies. Many body system. So many body system can control system, and actually this system including the state functions. So this is another interesting thing. However, we won't talk too deeper about in the compulsory physics, but actually I think this is the most important things when we start to study the physics. Actually, the classical mechanics is just only high school's labels, so we cannot talk much about the complicated system. However, the statistical mechanics can help us to figure out the series of these ones. And finally, said there's if we're talking about statistical mechanics, also the thermal mechanics is important. So the thermal mechanics is important, that the thermal mechanics actually talking about from the microscopy energies. So this will be great about the heat and the microscopy energies. And also that when we finish the thermal mechanics, and another will be that the electromagnetics mechanics. So electromagnetic mechanics actually from we can talking about the static charge, and the static charge will cause the electricity like the Coulomb force, and also the moving charge will cause the current, and the current will cause the magnetic fields. All these things are really important, and we construct the magnetic mechanics. That's great. Okay, so when we finish all these ones, that five the will be the relativities. So the relativities actually start from we're talking about the Einstein, Albert Einstein's about these ones, and also that when we finish the relativities, the final will be the QN. We call the quantum mechanics. The quantum mechanics actually is full of some interesting things. So we were talking about this one in the modern physics, and there's some effects like the photoelectricities, or there's some the matter wave and a spectrum, atomic spectrum. I think all of this is really interesting for some people. He is only for people who the students who are interested in the physics, there will be really important part of this. So all of this is about the physics. So the next section, we will talking about that the physical quantities and the physical units. So if we can, okay. So this is our today's start. So this is a great start for all of you, which you can understand these topics about the what is physics. I think all these things will help you. See you next time.